The night it all began, I walked alone under a gray sky that seemed to watch me from afar with a deceptive calm. I wasn't searching for anything, but somehow something was searching for me. The streets were wet, and every reflection of light seemed like a memory that wasn't mine. I felt time breathing around me as if the future was just a step away from reaching me, and I couldn't avoid it. Then the first shadow appeared, not as a person, but as a crack in reality, a figure that projected not a body but absence. It moved towards me without moving, with a silence so dense that my thoughts began to weigh heavily. I wanted to flee, but my legs wouldn't respond because something inside me wanted to understand what I was seeing. The shadow stopped in front of me, and its presence was like a whisper in an impossible language. I felt it knew my name, that it knew my decisions, even those I had yet to make. That moment was a border between today and something more. The air changed. It became colder, more ancient. I had the impression that my life was repeating itself from another place ahead, and that the shadow was the living proof of it. I wondered if it was a warning or an invitation. A part of me wanted to scream. Another wanted to keep moving towards the unknown, certain that nothing would ever be the same again. Thus began my encounter with the shadows of the future, and although I didn't know it then, that was just the first brush with a destiny already written somewhere in time. From that moment on, every step I took resonated as if I were walking on two worlds, the present and something yet unborn. The city lights flickered, and for a second, I saw different buildings, taller or perhaps older. I couldn't tell. I knew that the path had been laid long before I was born, and that the shadows were just waiting for the right moment to cross my path. That night led me to an intersection where the public clock struck 3, but my senses assured me that it was not the same hour for everyone. A dog barked in the distance, and the echo did not return, as if it had been absorbed by something I did not understand. When I looked up, I saw more shadows emerging. They did not walk. They simply appeared like forgotten memories insisting on returning. One of them extended an arm, and I could see within it a universe of possibilities, timelines swirling like luminous serpents. I dared to touch it, and in that instant my mind ceased to belong to me. I saw versions of myself growing, aging, dying, and being reborn in other parallel paths. I walked as a spectator through futures where I made different choices, each with its own burden of pain or glory. I discovered that the shadows were visitors from those futures, perhaps projections of myself or of others who did not yet exist. The contact lasted seconds, but for me, they were years suspended in an infinite crystal. When I returned to myself, the ground vibrated, the air burned, and the shadows seemed more defined now, with empty but attentive eyes. I felt no fear. I felt recognition, as if they had been part of me since my first breath. The street began to distort, the buildings stretched toward the sky, and the lights moved in circular patterns. Reality was a thin skin that stretched and trembled before my eyes. I began to hear distant voices whispering dates, names, warnings, and broken promises. One shadow approached closer than the others, and I understood that it was waiting for something I had to offer. Not words, not objects, but decisions. I knew that each future act would nourish or weaken those presences, and that my life was no longer just mine. The city around me began to fragment like a dream, losing shape with the light of dawn, but I continued moving toward a point where shadows seemed to wait for me with the patience of centuries. Each step resonated as if I were stepping on shards of time, and the air smelled of ancient electricity. I saw faces in the windows, faces that were mine and not mine at the same time, watching me from futures that had yet to occur. I felt my heart beating in a different rhythm than my body, as if a part of me was traveling faster than the rest. The shadows grouped together, forming a circle, and within it emerged a clear image, a futuristic city in ruins, covered in shimmering dust, with rusted machines that seemed to have had a life of their own. A voice arose from the void. It had no owner. It was the voice of time itself asking me if I would leave everything behind to follow the path that opened before me. I hesitated because I knew that accepting that destiny meant losing the reality I knew, but it also meant discovering who I truly was beyond the limits of the present. The ground opened, revealing a corridor of light that descended like an inverted river, inviting me to jump. Without understanding why, I took a step and felt my body fade away, turning into smoke, memory, pure possibility. I became just another traveler among the shadows and understood that the future was not a place, but an echo that repeats over and over again, seeking an answer that no one dares to give. When I awoke, I was in an unfamiliar room with walls that breathed and clocks that moved backward, marking seconds that never existed. I then knew there was no return, that my encounter with the shadows was merely the beginning of an endless journey. In the dim light, I heard footsteps that were not mine, and a door opened, revealing a future version of myself with eyes filled with cold light, watching me without blinking as the universe seemed to collapse around us. Even when the door closed behind my future double, I knew something else was approaching, somnolent and bright, like a star deciding to fall upon human consciousness. I stood up, and the room changed shape every time I blinked, walls curving like melted clocks, windows showing sunrises that did not yet exist. My reflection in a liquid mirror watched me with a patience almost paternal, pointing to a corridor that emerged where there had once been a simple wall. I walked through it, and with each step, I saw possible scenes. Wars halted before they began, cities floating over seas of silicon, children born with the memories of the elderly. Shadows follow me from afar like guardians or judges. I could not tell which. I wondered if any of those futures were mine, or if I was merely a temporary visitor doomed not to belong to any. A metallic breeze caressed my skin, carrying whispers of voices calling my name in different accents, ages, and destinies. I arrived at a clearing where the sky seemed fractured into millions of overlapping possibilities like an infinite crystal. There, a distinct shadow, denser than the others, spoke not with sound but with pure meaning, asking me to choose a definitive path. Before me appeared 3 routes, one made of memory, another of doubt, and the last of renunciation. Each pulsed with a rhythm that seemed like the heartbeat of the universe itself. I extended my hand toward the path of memory, thinking of everything I had left behind in my real life: friends, streets, laughter, the taste of coffee in the morning, and the warm summer rain. But the shadow slowly shook its head, and I understood that remembering was not moving forward. Then I looked at the misty and unstable path of doubt, where each step dissolved before it could settle firmly. That was living between maybe and never. Finally, I observed the luminous and cruel path of renunciation, like saying goodbye to oneself. I knew it was the path of total change, of accepting that the future waits for no one. And as I crossed it, my past would extinguish like a match in the wind. I took a deep breath, feeling my memories tremble like dry leaves, and took the first step toward renunciation. The ground shone beneath my feet, and every footprint I left vanished immediately, as if time refused to keep evidence of my decision. The shadows retreated, not in defeat but in respect, for they understood that I had chosen to move forward. Before me, the horizon opened, revealing an impossible city built with fragments of mixed eras. Steam trains running alongside floating vehicles, and buildings that emerged from the air like solidified thoughts. I walked through its streets, listening to conversations of people who had yet to be born and others who were already dead. No one seemed to see me, but everyone left a trail of future in the air, like the perfume of the inevitable. I felt I was no longer a visitor, but a living part of that temporal tapestry. A tower in the center of the city caught my attention, tall as a deep memory, and atop it shone a clock without numbers, its gears turning forward and backward simultaneously. I climbed millions of steps, or perhaps just a few, for time in that place was a ribbon that folded like wet paper. Upon reaching the top, I found an empty seat in front of the clock and understood its purpose. It was a throne of decision, a point where one could alter the fabric of tomorrow with just a thought. I sat down, and the shadows reappeared behind me, now clear, defined with human faces that perhaps were mine in possible futures. They did not speak, but their gazes demanded a final resolution. I closed my eyes, feeling the pulse of time run through my veins like liquid light, and understood that I was both origin and destination. If I wished, I could stop everything, rewind, or let the future continue expanding uncontrollably. I chose to allow time to flow like a river without an owner, and the shadows dissolved into silence, freeing me.